Hello, Year 2, and welcome to Wednesday's reading skills. Now, before we start to have a look at chapter 4 today, I'm just going to go over three different words, which are going to pop up in today's text, just as a little recap of our vocabulary, just to check that we know what these words mean. So the first word then is tenderly. The next word is doze. And the final word is scrape. So pause the screen now and have a go at thinking of what those words mean. Okay, let's look at tenderly then. So tenderly means with gentleness, kindness, and affection. So if you do something tenderly, that means you do it really gently. The next word is doze. Now, doze means to sleep lightly. So just as you start to fall asleep, you just tend to doze off. So go for it, just a little sleep. And the last word then is scrape, to remove the top layer off of something. Okay, so you might scrape the ice off of the windscreen of your car, maybe. Okay, so let's have a look at chapter 4 then. Now, if you do have the book at home, like I said the last couple of days, you can read along with me. Or if not, you can read along on the screen. Okay. So the next chapter is chapter 4, The Terrible Shovels. Down the hole, Mrs. Fox was tenderly licking the stump of Mr. Fox's tail to stop the bleeding. So there's that first word, then tenderly. So she was doing it really gently and with love and affection. It was the finest tail for miles around, she said, between licks. It hurts, said Mr. Fox. I know it does, sweetheart, but it'll soon get better. And it will soon grow again, Dad, said one of the small foxes. It will never grow again, said Mr. Fox. I shall be tailless for the rest of my life. He looked very glum. Anyone know what glum means? So if you look glum, you look very sad and miserable. There was no food for the foxes that night, and soon the children dozed off. There's that next word. Went to sleep. Then Mrs. Fox dozed off, but Mr. Fox couldn't sleep because of the pain in his stump of his tail. Well, he thought, I suppose I'm lucky to be alive at all. And now they've found our hole, we're going to have to move as soon as possible. We'll never get any peace if we... What was that? He turned his head sharply and listened. The noise he heard was now the most frightening noise a fox can ever hear. The scrape, scrape, scraping of shovels digging into the soil. Wake up, he shouted. They're digging us out. Mrs. Fox was wide awake in 1 second. She sat up, quivering all over. Are you sure that's it? She whispered. I'm positive. Listen. They'll kill my children, cried Mrs. Fox. Never, said Mr. Fox. But darling, they will, sobbed Mrs. Fox. You know they will. Scrunch, scrunch, scrunch went the shovels above their heads. Small stones and bits of earth began falling from the roof of the tunnel. How will they kill us, Mummy? Asked one of the small foxes. His round black eyes were huge with fright. Will there be dogs? He said. Mrs. Fox began to cry. She gathered her 4 children close to her and held them tight. Suddenly there was an especially loud crunch above their heads, and the sharp end of a shovel came right through the ceiling. The sight of this awful thing seemed to have an electric effect on Mr. Fox. He jumped up and shouted, I've got it. Come on, there's not a moment to lose. Why didn't I think of it before? Think of what, Dad? A fox can dig quicker than a man, shouted Mr. Fox, beginning to dig. Nobody in the world can dig as quick as a fox. Okay then, so here are your questions for today. Now, as I said, these are all retrieval questions. Now, when we retrieve something, that means that we are just picking it straight out of the text, and all of the answers are there for us. So the first question then is, what happened to Mr. Fox? Okay, so right at the end of chapter 3, okay, what happened to him? All right. The next question then, why couldn't Mr. Fox sleep? Okay, now there was a reason why Mr. Fox couldn't sleep. And if you need to rewind the video at all, that is fine, okay? Because there was a line which said, Mrs. Fox dozed off, Mr. Fox couldn't sleep because, so have another little reread of that one. You've also got your sentence starter there to help you. What noise did Mr. Fox hear? The noise Mr. Fox heard was, okay, again, you can go back and you can reread any of those bits if you need to, okay? Now find a little extra challenge then. Can you find a word in the text that means shaking? Okay, so can you find a word in the text which means the same as shaking? Now, if you need to, again, you can go back and you can have another little look over that. Okay, now I am going to read you chapter 5 just before the end of today's reading skills. So if you'd like to pause the video now and have a go at those questions that I've popped up on the board, then when you finish, you can unpause and you can just have a listen to chapter 5. Okay, chapter 5 then. I haven't popped this one up on the screen, so you can just listen to this one. And chapter 5 is called The Terrible Tractors. As the sun rose the next morning, Boggis and Bunce and Bean were still digging. They had dug a hole so deep that you could put a house into it, but they had not yet come to the end of the fox's tunnel. They were all very tired and cross. Dang and blast, said Boggis. Whose rotten idea was this? Bean's idea, said Bunce. Boggis and Bunce both stared at Bean. Bean took another swig of cider and then put the flask back into his pocket without offering it to the others. Listen, he said angrily, I want that fox, and I'm going to get that fox, and I'm not giving up until I've strung him up over my front porch, dead as a dumpling. We can't get him by digging, that's for sure, said fat Boggis. I've had enough of digging. Bunce, the little pot-bellied dwarf, looked up at Bean and said, Have you got any more stupid ideas then? What? Said Bean. I can't hear you. Bean never took a bath. He never even washed. As a result, his ear holes were clogged with all kinds of muck and wax and a bit of chewing gum and dead flies and stuff like that. This made him deaf. Speak louder, he said to Bunce, as Bunce shouted back, Have you got any more ideas? Bean rubbed the back of his neck with a dirty finger. He had a boil coming there and it itched. What we need on this job, he said, is machines, mechanical shovels. We'll have them out in 5 minutes with mechanical shovels. This was a pretty good idea, and the other two had to admit it. All right then, said Bean, taking charge. Boggis, you stay here and see that the fox doesn't escape. Bunce and I will go and fetch our machinery, and if he tries to come out, shoot him quick. The long, thin Bean walked away. The tiny Bunce trotted after him, and the fat Boggis stayed where he was with his gun pointing at the foxhole. Soon, two enormous caterpillar tractors with mechanical shovels on their front aims come clanking into the woods. Bean was driving one, Bunce the other. The machines were both black. They were murderous, brutal-looking machines. Here we go then, shouted Bean. Death to the fox, shouted Bunce. The machines went to work, biting huge mouthfuls of soil out of the hill. The big tree under Mr. Fox had dug his The big tree under which Mr. Fox had dug his hole in the first place, was toppled like a matchstick. On all sides, rocks were sent flying and trees were falling and the noises were deafening. Down in the tunnel, the foxes crouched, listening to the terrible clanging and banging overhead. "What's happening, Dad?" cried the small foxes. "What are they doing?" Mr. Fox didn't know what was happening or what they were doing. "It's an earthquake," cried Mrs. Fox. "Look," said one of the small foxes. "Our tunnel's got shorter and I can see the daylight." They all looked round, and yes, the mouth of the tunnel, that was only a few feet away from them now, and in the circle of daylight beyond, they could see two huge black tractors almost on top of them. "Tractors!" shouted Mr. Fox. "Mechanical shovels! Dig for your lives! Dig, dig, dig!" Okay, so that is the end of chapter 5. So I hope you have enjoyed listening to that today. Tomorrow we will be having a look at chapter 6, and then we will be doing some sequencing, so putting our story into order. Okay, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to receiving your retrieval questions from today, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye everyone.